What's up, history class? Mr. Tim here, and I'm just checking out my receding hairline. Geez, it's getting worse, isn't it? Well, it's time for another rendition of home-based learning history videos with Mr. Tim. I hope you enjoyed the history video package, the package of videos I gave you 2 weeks ago about the history of modern Iran. We talked a little bit about Mossadegh, the Shah, Ayatollah Khomeini, and a little bit of the current events taking place in Iran in the context of the IGCSE history syllabus. This week, I'm making a video about Iraq, another country in this part of the chapter, in this part of the world, the Gulf, the Persian Gulf. And so I'm not going to go too much into the X's and O's about modern Iraq today. What I'm going to basically do is give you a brief historical background of the central figure in this drama, Saddam Hussein, how he came to power, and how he was able to maintain power. We're not going to go into his regime today or his policies or anything like that. This is just about how he got to power, so you understand that, because it's kind of a complicated and convoluted story. For this lesson, I've actually typed up some notes. I'm a little bit more prepared this time. I'm not going to be waxing poetic off the top of my head, but I'm a little bit more organized here. So nothing too extensive, just a couple bullet points that are on the laptop here. So I'm going to go into the history about why Saddam Hussein was able to come to power in Iraq. Okay, we have to start really in World War I. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire, which was known as the sick man of Europe, it broke apart. It lost, it was on the losing side of the war, and it broke up into different mandates, by which the French and the British controlled the mandates. So, for example, the French controlled Syria, I think Lebanon, and maybe another one, Transjordan. You're going to have to fact check me on that. And the British controlled Palestine, which became very controversial later on when the State of Israel was created, and it also was awarded Iraq. Well, it wasn't really awarded it. I mean, the French and the British kind of carved it up through what was known as the Sykes-Picot Accord, which you can look up more on your own, now that we've covered World War I enough over the last 2 years. So what's important for this video is that Iraq was a British mandate. So the British had control of Iraq after World War I. A monarchy was put in place, but this was widely regarded as like a puppet regime of the British. And Iraq remained deeply split along like religious and ethnic lines. So if you look at Iran today, did I just say Iran? I did. I meant Iraq. If you look at Iraq today, there's basically three groups based on religious and ethnic divisions, right? So you have a Sunni Muslim part of the population, and they're mostly in, I guess it would be the southwest part of Iraq, close to Saudi Arabia, which is like the heartland of Sunni Islam. You have Shiites, who are located closer to the border with Iran, and that's the big Shiite country in the world. And then you have a group of people called the Kurds. And the Kurds are located mostly in the north of Iraq, but also in other countries as well, such as Iran and Turkey, and maybe even going up more north than that into Syria. The Kurds, I mean, a lot of people say that they should have their own country, but they don't. They're in they're a titular group, a national group, but they don't have their own country, and they're very, I guess you would say they don't really fit into the Muslim, like the how would I put this, the preconceived notions that the West would have of Islam. The Kurds don't fit into that box. You know, they drink alcohol, for example. They seem to be a little bit more progressive on those type of social norms. Okay, so that's what you have to remember. There's three groups in Iraq: Kurds, Sunnis, and Shiites. So right off the bat, you know this is a combustible thing. And this explosive mix has always meant that Iraq has kind of veered in between complete chaos and order in the form of a dictatorship. Because if you're going to try, as the Americans learned in 2003, if you're going to try to import Western democracy into these countries like Iraq, like Afghanistan, where it's a similar situation, it's going to be a disaster. Okay, let's fast forward the timeline a little bit. 1937, right before World War II now, Saddam Hussein was born in a village called Tikrit. It's about 100 kilometers north of Baghdad, the capital. And it's a peasant village. It was a peasant village back then, and he was a peasant growing up, Saddam. His father died before he was born, though, and he was raised mostly by his stepfather, who treated Saddam very harshly, and this made him distrustful and violent. Saddam claimed that he was 10 years old when he first killed someone. And as a teenager, he spent, I think, 6 months in prison after he killed his brother-in-law in a family argument. By the way, Saddam's name, wrote this down, in Arabic means he who confronts, for what it's worth. All right, so that's a little bit about how he was born. Now, fast forward more to the 1950s. In 1952, very important guy that you have to know here. His name was Colonel Gebdel Nasser, and he was an Egyptian military officer, and he seized power in Egypt, overthrowing King Farouk, who was a puppet ruler of the French and British governments that had nominal control over Egypt at that time. Nasser is a very important figure in history, and you should know him for one thing that we did study this year when we looked at the Suez Crisis in the context of the Hungarian uprising, because that was going on in the same year, 1956. That's why the Western powers weren't so concerned about Suez. They were dealing with, they weren't too concerned about the Hungarian uprising because they were overly concerned about the Suez Crisis. Well,